Now, in his old age, the patient suffered from a condition that disabled all his physical abilities except speech and thought. I keep getting worse, the patient said. I'm not sick enough to die, but I'm not well enough to live. This is not a life. I'd rather die. Can you pray that for me? I let silence envelop us for a moment. Your statement reminds me of a saying of the Prophet Muhammad, I offer gently. He said, "O Allah, grant me life as long as it's good for me, and grant me death if that's better for me." The patient began to cry. That's exactly it, he affirmed.
So much for agreeing to chat with me. When I met you, I think it was a week ago now, I was so fascinated by the fact that you told me that you're a chaplain. I was like, wait, a Muslima chaplain? I have to hear more. And so I just wanted to quickly do a brief kind of introduction about you. So I told everyone that your name is Sondos, but where are you from and where are you currently based?
Thank you for having me, first of all. It's such an honor to be in conversation with you today. So Sundus, I was actually born in Damascus, Syria, so ethnically I'm Syrian, but my parents moved to California, Southern California to be specific, in like when I was just under 2 years old, and I basically lived in California my entire life. Up until last year, when my husband got a job in Qatar, in Doha. And so we moved here. So now I am based in Qatar, which is the first time I've ever lived outside of California, which is
Wow,
crazy.
that's crazy.
But here I am and sort of, enjoying the new opportunities and the change in perspective.
Oh, absolutely. I can only imagine. And there's some cool things happening in the country right now. I've heard in terms of innovation and technology wise, but that's not the conversation for today. So thank you for sharing that. So the point of today's conversation was to really dive into like what inspired you to become a chaplain?
Like you, I had sort of heard the term chaplain, but not really quite sure what it was, especially when it's attached to somebody who's Muslim, because when we hear the word chaplain, there is an assumption that it's rooted in, somebody from a Christian background. So it was I think it was 2013 or 2014. My family and I, my two kids, my husband, were attending a Muslim family camp that was like a week long in Northern California. And on the first day that we were there, the camp admin introduced us to the person who was going to be leading all of the spiritual activities for that week. And they said, "This is Chaplain Sohaib Sultan."
Wow.
And he was the Muslim chaplain at Princeton University. God have mercy on his soul. He actually passed a few years ago at, I think he was 41 from cancer. So he and his wife Arshi were at the camp, and I just remember looking at him, and he was just like standing and smiling as they were introducing him and his wife. And he had just such an incredible aura of peace and stability, and he just looked like he was just so rooted in something that was so solid. And he had this really beautiful light and smile. He was just like radiating this energy. And I remember thinking to myself, whatever this brother is doing in his spiritual life,
Mhm.
that is what I've been looking for my entire life. So I followed him around for the next few days and said, "What's a chaplain and what does your day-to-day look like?" And at this point, also, I can introduce into the context that my kids were like at maybe like 7 and 5 years old. I had been a stay-at-home mom, already graduated undergrad, but really looking for what they call your calling. Like,
Yeah.
what do you have to contribute to this world? And I knew that I had a bunch of passions, but I never really knew what to do with them. So I was really passionate about faith and interfaith work and listening to people's stories. I did my undergraduate studies in English and creative writing. I really loved writing. I love storytelling. And so as he was going through his day-to-day, 9 to 5, he was basically encapsulating all of the things that I've ever been passionate about. And I was like, you get paid to do this? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, this is a real job? And he's like, yeah. And so he walked me through the process. He said, you want to enroll in a Master's of Divinity in chaplaincy. You want to do your CPE or clinical pastoral education. And then he said, and I really encourage you to go for the board certification. He's like, Sondos, that's the gold standard for chaplains for all faith groups. And he's like, and there's no reason why. How did he put it? He said something like, our community deserves the best.
Wow.
So if you're like going to go into this, basically do it with excellence, do it all the way. And that really stuck with me. And I'm happy to say that after a very grueling process, I was board certified. I did everything and then got my board certification in 2021 or 2022.
Oh, wow.
21. Yeah, so I'm almost coming up on my 4 year, or completed 4 years of it. So yeah, that's how I was introduced to it, and it took another 2 years after I met him to actually enroll in the program, just because I was with my kiddos and
Yes.
other circumstances and whatnot.
Yes. So, we're inspired in 2013 at the camp. Took you 2 years due to family reasons. So we're talking about 2015. So between 2015 and 2021 is when you completed all your studies and wow. So master's and then the board certification.
So it's quite a process, and I think this is important for folks to realize is that there is an assumption, and I worked at the in the hospital setting for 8 years.
Mm.
Um, there's an assumption that it's just people who have who want to do good and they're sort of volunteering their time. But chaplaincy, especially after I think 2010, 2008, there really has been a push to professionalize the field and really standardize the competencies for chaplains so that you don't get somebody who's, a volunteer and somebody who's a doctor of ministry all doing the same thing. So there's been a push sort of nationally to create these standards, and that's where the board certification comes in to make sure that you're up to par with those standards. And so going back to this idea that a lot of people at the hospital just thought like, oh, I'm just doing this in my spare time just because I want to serve people. That's how it starts. But because you're sitting with people and you're dealing with their soul in the most vulnerable time that they will probably ever find themselves in, you better believe you have to have training and you have to know when
Mm.
to not speak. And when you do speak, what do you say? How do you say it? And so the master's is not a 2 year program, it's a 3 year program. It's 72 units. It
Wow.
took me 4 years to complete because I did it part-time, again, because I was with my kids. So there's 4 years of studying, and the curriculum is made up of theology, as one can imagine, training in one's own faith tradition. For me, it was Islam. And then you also have classes in psychology, sociology. So there's a bit of counseling. Um, there's a bit of like community, understanding how to be with people. And then the CPE component, one has to complete before you even think about board certification. And CPE stands for Clinical Pastoral Education. And this is yet another, it's like a continuation of your studies, your master's. Once you
Wow.
graduate your master's, you enroll in this clinical work. And this is basically where you take the theory and like, you know, put it into practice. And you do it with a supervisor. He's you have an educator, you have a cohort of interfaith chaplains, people coming from different faith groups. You're all students, and you're basically let loose in the hospital, and you practice and you practice and you practice and you practice. And then you come back to group every week. You talk to your supervisor, your educator about what kinds of conversations you had, what were the encounters. And I think people would be surprised again to hear that the majority of chaplaincy training, I would say 90% of it, revolved around, how do I say this? Like basically self-regulation,
Wow.
awareness, emotional regulation. 90% of chaplaincy work is just catching myself, my own triggers, things I want to respond with that are not appropriate in the moment, how things are making me feel, my anxiety. So it's a lot of getting past all that so that one can be rooted and solid, like Chaplain Sohaib was in that moment. And he really demonstrated that in the midst of chaos and crisis. So you're sort of like holding down the room. If you imagine a chaplain is not the only non-anxious presence in the room to sort of regulate and offer that non-anxious presence in the midst of chaos and crisis. And so there's a lot of internal work that one has to do. But this was so wonderful for me because this is exactly what my faith it's exactly what my faith tries to accomplish in every single human being through prayer, through fasting, through all of these methods of self-discipline. That's the whole point, is so that we can be emotionally regulated, anchored human beings, not messing up other people's paths and ways.
Yes, absolutely. So interesting though. So with this 3-year program, then you're doing your CPE.
Yes.
You finally, you meet with your cohort and then you get your board certification after that. Wow.
After that, you have
And
to
then
complete 2,000 clinical hours.
wow, wow. Then that's part of the board certification is that 2,000 hours. Okay. And after all that, is it a volunteer position? So do you get paid or you don't get paid?
Mm. You do get paid, which is
Oh,
nice. Not much.
okay.
It's not much. So that's what I always tell people. I'm sort of the Debbie Downer when people call me and be like, I want to be a chaplain. I'm like, okay, so prepare yourself for a lot like time investment and money investment. The seminary, the MDiv programs are not cheap. They're usually through private institutions. You spend a lot of money, you spend a lot of time. The reward is not in the salary. It is definitely in being with people. But yes, so it is employment based. But I will say that the pioneers of chaplains in the Muslim community came out of, I believe it was the late 60s and the early 70s with in the prison setting where like African American imams and I guess sisters who were from the community went in on a volunteer basis and did this work for many, many, many years until like our community started really getting organized and saying, no, we need to compensate these people for giving their time and their expertise and their energy. And so from there, I think it rolled out into like part-time positions on college campuses, and then some Muslim chaplains got hired. And now today you'll find chaplains and Muslim chaplains everywhere. I'm speaking sort of to both realities, but
Yeah.
there's college campuses are employment based, although that has some nuances there. In the hospital, hospice, also agencies will utilize chaplains. The military hires chaplains, corrections facilities, community settings. So like religious institutions, churches, synagogues, mosques can always use chaplains to sort of supplement the work of the clergy. There are cruise chaplains.
Are there
Um,
really?
they get on a cruise and
Okay.
do that. There are fire department chaplains. So I would say I did 3 years of police chaplaincy.
Interesting. Okay.
And police chaplaincy was on a volunteer basis.
Yeah.
So I believe they're not allowed to hire chaplains. This is sort of like just pulling from the community and having them volunteer their time. And I believe the fire department may be the same, but I'm not too like well versed in that. So
And so
it depends, but the majority of the roles are paid, yeah.
are paid, which is good to hear because of course if you're, I mean, beyond the amount of education and so on, right? If you have to eat at the end of the day, right? And you have to be thinking about how you're going to get your next meal, it doesn't really give you much time to focus on, the people who you work with. Although, as you said, it's not much, but something,
It's
I
not.
suppose. Yeah.
It's not, and I hear, I mean, I'm in a blessed position where I'm not the breadwinner in my family, but so I can work at a lower rate. But I know folks, my own colleagues in my workspaces who have had to do two jobs, two or three jobs sometimes. Either they're teaching of a chaplaincy or religious courses and they get paid from there. They're doing like hospice work on the side where they're visiting people at their homes and getting paid through that. Then they have work at the hospital because that's where I was, and they do like the, hours for that. Sometimes they're doing overnights trying to make ends meet. So, I mean, thank your chaplain if you know one, because a lot of them are hustling to make ends meet.
Wow. Wow. So it's really, I've heard this expression once. I briefly worked at a hotel for a month, a story for another time. But I remember asking, because the pay was so abysmally low, I asked this manager, like, why would anybody do this? And he responded to me, for the love of the game. It's like, speaking
Mhm.
about, so I assume it must be the same. You guys do it for the love of what you do, um, because the pay is really more, I guess, recognition that you are doing work. So I'm very curious, when do you typically get, like, I don't know if that's fortunate, unfortunate. I've never had an opportunity to interact with a chaplain before. So when are they called in, or do you kind of proactively go and talk to, do you call them patients, clients? Give me a little bit more education about that.
Sure. It depends on the context. In the hospital setting, we call them patients. In a more general setting, rather than clients, because we're not licensed therapists or counselors, they're not our clients in that they're like paying us per se, but we're part of an overall institution and part of a team providing care for the person. We call them care seekers,
Got it.
which is a term that I've only heard really used in chaplaincy. But in the hospital setting, patients, I imagine maybe on college campuses, they're students, and then so on and so forth. Um, And so how it works in the hospital is it comes from a lot of different angles. At the beginning of the day, we get a handoff from the overnight chaplain to see which patients maybe need some follow-up from the previous night. So those go on our list. Throughout the day, we used to have pagers, but now we've upgraded to phones, where nurses, physicians, social workers, the palliative care team, any facet department of the hospital, when they are in conversation with the patient and sense that they need religious support or spiritual support, if they're talking about God or faith or anything like that, trying to make sense of what's happening to them, they'll put
Mm.
a consult in for a chaplain. And so we'll know, okay, patient in room, whatever, 202 needs to be seen. Sometimes they'll put stat, so we need to drop everything and go. Speaking of stat and dropping everything and going, while we're sort of rounding, what we call it in the hospital, we're just very present in the departments and the different units, talking to nurses, trying to gauge like if the nurses are doing okay. We're also checking in on the staff as well as the patients, trying to be visible, and so people remember that we're around and we want to be used. Any codes that come through on the loudspeaker. So if it's a code blue, for example, in the emergency room, again, we drop everything. Even if I'm mid conversation with the patient, I'll have to excuse myself, and we rush to the emergency room, and we're there as part of the team because it could result in a death, and the chaplain will be there to pick up the pieces after the team that's trying to resuscitate leaves the room. And then we also escort family in and allow them to sit with the deceased. And it's a whole process after they're doing everything in the emergency room. After all of that quiets, the chaplain comes in and does their work for the next like couple of hours. We get personal referrals. So if a patient, is reading through the hospital brochure or leaflet and they notice that we have a spiritual care department and maybe they want to talk to somebody or want some prayer or anything like that, they'll ask their nurse, oh, can I see a chaplain? And then we'll get that, referral there. And then we have things like pre-scheduled visits where it'll be pre-op, um, patients coming in for surgery, and they fill out a little checklist that says, would you like to have a chaplain visit you before your surgery and pray with you? And they'll say yes. And so we'll get a list like in the very early morning of those patients who will need to be seen. So it's coming from all sorts of different angles. Like I said, I was a police chaplain as well. That one is a bit different because you're called by like the operator and told, okay, they're giving a death notice, for example, for a community member, and they'd really like a chaplain to ride along and to come be a part of that. Or there'll be some suspicious death or something at a home that the officers will be going into to investigate. And there'll be other family members there that are sort of, in shock and not sure what to do. So they'll ask the chaplain to again, what's the word I'm looking for? Come along with the officers and provide that sort of presence and comfort for the family members that are there or other neighbors and things that are sort of starting to gather. And then obviously if there are officers who are struggling, then they'll ask the chaplain to do what we call a ride along, where we're matched with an officer and we just ride with them in their car, in their police car for 3, 4, 5 hours, during their shift, and just sort of chat with them and make ourselves available. And then we have the community chaplaincy, which I do as well, and I'm still doing from Qatar, via Zoom and office hours and things like that and phone calls. And those are sign up. So I have a schedule available online for community members. And so they just sort of choose the date and the time that aligns with their schedule. And we have a 30-minute call. So it's a service that we provide to community members who have, questions, who feel like they need some guidance, who need a sounding board, who really aren't sure what to do, who want to double check and make sure that they're, choosing something that aligns with their Islamic values and principles. And so they'll sign up for a chat and I'll just know in advance when it comes through and sort of make myself available there. So those are all sort of like different. You can see how depending on the context, it will look a little bit different.
I'm I literally just got goosebumps because I was like, it's almost like you guys are, I wouldn't say shadows, but I had no idea that there was this whole kind of undergroup like supporting and uplifting the community. The fact that you guys check in on very, like, for example, in the hospital setting, when you said part of the care team, I'm like, oh my goodness. I didn't realize how holistic the care can be, or how, sometimes you guys are checking in on nurses and doctors and just incredible. I guess to me, it's almost like, what else do I not know about people who are, I mean, not just in chaplaincy, but just in general, people who are helping so many others, which is part of the reason why I want to tell this story. Very fascinating, very, very fascinating. Especially the ride-alongs, and then the fact that the police chaplains are doing this on a volunteer basis. Because I do know, the police are here to protect and serve, and it's a very heavy job. But I could imagine too, and this was one of my questions for you, like you're talking about code blues, right? So you're in the middle, we're having a conversation about something, I'm going into surgery, and then all of a sudden you're like, gotta go, right? There's a code blue. How do you stay like emotionally regulated through all this? Because we talked about this at the beginning, that is the core of it. But what are some of the practices you employ to do that?
Sure. Yeah, a lot of our training is exactly that. Self-awareness piece, so understanding in our body when we start to get triggered or when we need to just take a break. Gosh, there's so many things that I will utilize just depending on what I need in the moment. So I don't do typically, I try not to do back-to-back visits. Like I need to take a breather in between encounters because each one is just so could be very heavy, just could be very special, very sacred, and you sort of need it to like marinate and process through it. And so for the heavier ones, I'll do it with a colleague and say, hey, something really, really heavy happened, or I'm still sorting out exactly what happened. Can I talk to you about it? Again, I love writing, and I write about my encounters and process through that. And from a spiritual standpoint, there's so many things that I do. Very importantly, in the morning and in the evening. So right when I wake up and before I go to bed, the bookends of the day, I have specific prayers that I will be doing that I call like building my spiritual fortress for the day and for the night. And so there are specific things that I'll be praying for protection, for ease, for openings, for wisdom, just to understand that this work is nothing that I am doing per se, but what God is allowing me to do and using me to be able to get to other people. And it's such an honor. And so I was remembering that I'm not alone. So it's very comforting to know like it's all you, God. I'm just a vessel and just work your magic. Do
Yeah.
what you need to do. um, saying a specific prayer before I enter into a room, or even before we had this interview, I did that prayer. Before I go into a phone call with a community member, I do a prayer, and essentially just like grounding myself in that reminder that it's not about me. It's
Mm.
not me. This is all goes back to God, and that's the whole goal of it. Um, what else do I do? Yeah, talking to people about it. Um, and if something really sticks with me, like you need to know what part of our training is to know when a case won't leave you. So I don't know why exactly. Maybe I really have to sit with this a little bit longer, but not every care seeker or every encounter stays with me,
Oh.
even though it could be something that's really heavy. Um, there's a feeling of I don't want to call it like satisfaction, but it is very rewarding that at the end of the encounter, no matter how heavy it is, whatever we're doing to help the care seeker through it, they communicate that to us towards the end of the encounter. And that provides so much closure for us, even though nothing's really been fixed and nothing's really changed in that moment, just to be able to hear the care seeker say something like, I really needed to talk to you about it. I really needed to talk to somebody about that. Thank you so much. Or, oh, I feel like a load has been taken off of me and I can like breathe again. Thank you. Or, making that referral and connecting them with somebody who can support them long term or give them more resources and know that they're going to be in good hands. Reminding them about their own faith and their that they're not alone and that they can always reach out to God, and seeing that sort of that light bulb turn on in their head, like, oh my gosh, yes, I'm not alone. And I do have somebody, or I do have something that I can go back to and sort of root myself in. So there's like little things that happen throughout the encounter that also is like, yes, they're going through it and um, they're going to be okay. Like whatever that okay looks like, they're going to be okay. But again, we have to realize when the case doesn't leave us. And so if I'm going home and I'm still replaying something that happened or
Mhm.
something that stayed with me, there are a few things I do. Among them, obviously talking to a teacher of mine, processing with a colleague, and then essentially making prayer for them. So if I feel like, man, I didn't really show up in the way that I wanted to show up for them, or I really wish I could have done more, or just the circumstances were not allowing me to really do whatever I felt like I needed to do or be in the way that I really needed to be, then I'll give it back to God and be like, God, they're in your hands. Like,
Mm.
please take care of them, send them everything that they need. Have somebody else show up for them tonight and just be with them. And so some really specific things that I feel like I missed out on or that I really wanted for them, then that's just in prayer and like, who is more merciful and compassionate than God? So I know that, they're going to be taken care of. So those are just some ways that the last thing that I want to mention as part of the training and why this is really, really important for anybody who's thinking even about chaplaincy. You really have to figure your stuff out theologically. Like
Mm.
we call this theology of suffering, and that's sort of borrowed from the Christian language, but I find it very helpful to summarize. If you don't have an answer personally to why do bad things happen to good people, why does suffering exist in the world, um, why do people do the things that they do, um, why do people have and then some people have and some people don't have, all of these sort of existential perennial questions that every faith tradition attempts to answer in their own way. You better know that stuff, and
Mm.
you better find an answer for yourself that gives you some sort of comfort or some sort of reasoning and explanation. And it might look different for each person, and that's fine, but you are going to encounter really difficult things, and people are really going through it on so many different levels.
Mm.
So if you theologically in your head and in your heart, you don't have that piece figured out, it's going to rock you and it's not going to be very healthy. So I feel like if you're rooted in those answers, you'll see what is happening in terms of the situation with a much wider lens. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. Weirdly enough, I'm the more religious person in my family. And I get those existential questions sometimes, and I'm like, they're tough questions to answer. I could not imagine having to, consistently be confronted with probably some of the worst things that people have to confront in life, and having to constantly, I mean, you said earlier on, it's a little bit difficult, or you are trained to know kind of when to speak and when not to speak, because even sometimes those answers, while we may believe them, may not make someone feel everything happens for a reason is not maybe the best answer in certain situations, right? Where someone is grieving the loss of a child or something horrific happened to, a spouse or something. And so I could only imagine how difficult it must be to stay grounded in that in yourself after seeing kind of some of the worst things happen, but then also kind of threading the needle as to when to insert those what we believe to be truths while not seeming insensitive or negating what that person is feeling. Very fascinating. So speaking of which, could you share a moment that really, from your work, that really stayed with you?
How much time do we have? I mean, every day is a moment that really stays. Oh my gosh. The flip side of this work, Leslie, is that yes, you're confronted with some of the heaviest situations you will ever see, but also some of the most beautiful moments and interactions where you're just like, God, are you here? Like, this is absolutely incredible. Um, Gosh, so many. But since I write to process, I captured many of these encounters and stories in like brief vignettes, and I'm wondering if it's okay to read one.
Yes,
And I think
please.
it will be okay. Um, okay, so begin. I'm just unlucky, the patient lamented angrily. He said that he couldn't fathom a God who called himself Rahim, the most merciful, and could allow such pain to exist. He said he was Muslim until his late teen years and then stopped believing in religion and God due to poor role models in leadership. Now, in his old age, the patient suffered from a condition that disabled all his physical abilities except speech and thought. I keep getting worse, the patient said. I'm not sick enough to die, but I'm not well enough to live. This is not a life. I'd rather die. Can you pray that for me? I let silence envelop us for a moment. You know, your statement reminds me of a saying of the Prophet Muhammad, I offer gently. He said, "O Allah, grant me life as long as it's good for me, and grant me death if that's better for me." The patient began to cry. That's exactly it, he affirmed. So we said the dua, the prayer, together. I'm just unlucky, the patient repeated, this time with resignation. I left the room with his words in my heart. I had held back so many of my own thoughts and reflections about God, this test, prayer. The patient was on his own spiritual journey, and my job was to walk alongside, not dictate the path. But I couldn't stop thinking about that visit. The next day, I returned as promised. The patient greeted me with a warm smile and was excited to inform me that overnight, the pain had disappeared entirely, so much so that he would be going home very soon. Look, I can even move my arms. I stood today and sat in the chair. The difference between the day before and that day was undeniable. Perhaps life was determined better for you, I said softly in awe. The patient began to cry. I woke up early this morning and remembered you. I thought to myself, maybe she's praying for me. You prayed, I reframed for the patient. Miraculous moments like these only reinforce for me the power of sincere prayer.
Mm.
The beauty remains in the way the Prophet Muhammad surrenders the outcome to God, And whether God responds overnight or after decades, he most certainly listens.
Incredible. What, do
So it's
you
just like
publish these anywhere? Do you have an anthology of these?
I do. So I have a very, very early book that I published. It's available on Amazon called Musings of a Muslim Chaplain. And this was published in 2020. And that was inspired by a young man whose mom was in the ICU dying of cancer.
Mm.
And he literally said, you know, can I talk to you outside? And we went outside into the waiting room. And he was like, what's going to happen? And I thought he was talking about his mom and the death process and end of life. So I said, can you explain a little bit more about what you mean? He's like, what's going to happen to me? He said, like,
Mm.
what do you see here with sons and daughters who lose a loved one? He's like, what? And I started to understand he's asking about the grief process.
Yeah.
Like it was so unknown to him and he was so scared of it. He's like, what am I getting into? You know, like I have all these feelings. He's like, I'm crying all the time. Is that normal? And so that sort of began this thought to me to be like, let's put something together that demystifies grief and makes it, and it's really it's a universal experience and process. There is not a single creature on this planet who is not going to go through losing something or someone and feeling that grief.
Absolutely. Um, I could talk to you all day, but I want to be respectful of your time because you're doing some good work out there. So I'll just wrap up with probably just one more, maybe two more questions if we have time. I think maybe just one more question. Any last thoughts or advice for somebody who, I know you mentioned kind of being grounded in emotional self as a key component for anyone who wants to get into this work. Anything else that you want to say before we end the call that you want people to know or think about, um, that you would like to share?
Um, just if chaplaincy is a new um, field or concept for you, and now hopefully after you listen to this, you feel like this is something that you could benefit from, please feel free to reach out. I think chaplaincy services are way underutilized because many people
Mm.
either don't know about them, that they even exist, or that they're really multi-faith focused. So even though I'm a Muslim chaplain, I was the only chaplain on shift at my hospital, or doing my shift. And that doesn't mean that I only see Muslim patients. I saw everybody. And that's what our training is that even though you're of another faith group or you have a different philosophy of life, my aim is not to impose my beliefs onto you, but rather sit with you and try and figure out with you to explore what it is that gives you hope and anchoring, and then maybe connect you to your faith community and bring somebody in from outside who you can trust and who can like further that conversation. So some chaplaincy in general is for everybody. So we're trained to look after everybody. And then on top of that, also for people to understand that you don't necessarily have to have a religious question or a religious crisis in order to see a chaplain. But even if you're trying to decide what major should I go into, or I'm feeling stuck in my career, or I'm finding that my relationship with my parents is disintegrating, or with my spouse, or whatever it is. So we're not counselors, we're not, marriage and family therapists, but what our specialty is we explore with you what are the ways in which your faith or your philosophy or your values in life will help you make sense of what it is that you're going through. And
Mm.
then, you obviously refer you out to whoever else needs to do the more long-term work, if any, like a career counselor or anything like that. But all of us, when we are confronted with these big questions in life, we look to something or someone for guidance. And for some people, that's scripture. For some people, that's God and revelation. For some people, that's what are my big truths about life in this world? What is my philosophy on the way that I am in the world and what happens and why it happens in the world? There's something spiritual in every single one of us that the chaplain really tries to bring out to the forefront to help us to see what we're going through more clearly. And so it doesn't mean necessarily that you'll get an answer or that we're here to just give you advice or to teach you anything religious. That's not the point of chaplaincy.
I'm so glad you cleared that up because I think a lot of us have that question between like, when could I see a chaplain? And I know imams, pastors, priests, um, rabbis, whoever, all types of spiritual leaders are frankly overburdened today, right? And they're so I love that you encourage people to kind of seek out chaplains too and are encouraging others to join the practice as well because you guys are so needed and are clearly doing such incredible work. And we want to get you back to that incredible work. So thank you. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time today. It was an absolute pleasure. And like I said, we will make sure in the description box to include where folks like you were welcoming questions. So I will include that information in the description as well as where they can find your book. So thank you so much, Sundus.